Chronicles, and I'm impressed with the information that I've found there, and happy to be here.
I appreciate it, man. A lot of work goes into that site. Like anything else in life, a lot actually goes into that site. And before we actually get to your encounter, Randy, I was looking on the website on SasquatchChronicles.com, and people were submitting their questions. I was going to ask them on the air, and I noticed you went through and answered everyone's questions. I really appreciate you doing that, taking the time to do that. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully we can get to some of the questions that you didn't answer. One of the things that was brought up on the website, I noticed Joyce was asking you about a particular encounter with rock stacks. Will you tell us about that?
The area that I started researching in 2003, 2004, and 2005, this is the area that it happened at. But what you got to do is you got to go back to the beginnings of my research there. The other gentleman that I eventually met up with and researched the area with, he has since passed away. He was my friend. His name was Keith. In the beginnings, we would put out trash bags full of popcorn. I mean, we would butter those things up, and we would salt them up so salty because, we knew that animals need minerals. And what I didn't know is there's a place on that ridge that has serious minerals that these animals come to, I think, to lick the rocks to get their minerals. But I didn't know this at the time. Anyways, so we put out trash bags full of popcorn. And one way that we would know it was them getting into it, and we would hang the bags up with a rope, and we would hang them up about 10 foot. And we made sure that even the antlers of a deer couldn't even reach them. I mean, we wanted to make sure that anything that was getting to these things was our target animals. But anyways, we would know that it was them when we'd come look at one of the bait sites, and we would set these things up about an eighth of a mile circle around our campsite. We'd go and we'd look, and if the bag was down and tore open, there were times when you could see that it was tore open by having a stick stabbed through the bag and stuck into the ground through the bag, like it impaled the bag first just to make sure it was safe. And then when that happened, they would just tear the bag open and finish out all the popcorn. But so that was a pretty specific pattern of getting into our baits, which would tell us it was there. There were times that the bags would be tore down by a raccoon or something and not stabbed with a stick. So we couldn't guarantee that a Bigfoot did that. But there were times when you'd see a stick stabbed through the bag, and the bag would still be impaled by the stick. That pretty much said to us that something with a hand did that. So anyways, so that's kind of the very beginnings of that area, of me setting up that area as being a place where I would go all the time. Now, I would also put out other baits, there were cliffs, there were rock cliffs down there that I could kind of shimmy up, and there were little bitty shelves that I could set food up on. They were 10 or 12 feet up that, nothing could reach. They couldn't reach it with their hand. And I'd put melons, cantaloupes, things like that. But I would also put, and here's what I think is significant, I would put pictures. I had a drawing of a Bigfoot and a man standing side by side, and I had them laminated. I had a lot of these pictures, and I would just put them out with my bait. Now, the man I would have wearing a blue uniform with yellow letters that said fire department on it. Now, every time I went down there, I did all of my research in the fall, so it was cool nights and cool days. But I would always wear my blue fire department sweatshirt, very dark blue with bright yellow letters. That's not something that most people wear when they go camping, so it made me easily identifiable. So here I am down there all these times putting out baits that these things are taking, and I'm putting out a picture of one of them and a man standing side by side with my baits. Now, I didn't really know if that is what culminated in, what I'm going to tell you about what happened later, but it may have. Just the fact that maybe they got to know me and knew that I wasn't there to hurt them or anything like that, and I was the guy that would bring food. So, maybe it was as simple as that. Anyways, so let's go ahead and fast forward. several years. I'd been through a few conferences down there. I'd spoken at a couple of them. The NABRC kind of took over the conferences down there at Honolulu, and I was a part of that organization. So we just kind of, that was our big event every year was, in October, first weekend of October down there. This one time in, 2010, I wanted to get there early. I had a new camp area that I wanted to, it was in a valley. The logging road looked out over this deep valley with, high sides, and I thought, man, what a great place to be able to listen with a recorder at night. So I wanted to camp there. So we all get there on a Monday before, the weekend before the conference starts. So the conference is supposed to start on Friday. We get there Monday, so that's a good 5 days before. But we all get there a little late. I just got a brand new Polaris Ranger and was excited to use it. Knew that we could load up all kinds of camping supplies on this thing. And three or four other guys showed up with ATVs. So we had my Polaris Ranger and 2 or 3 ATVs. We get there at 10 o'clock at night, and we actually leave our vehicles down in there was a little Christ 40 acres, which is just a place where the conference is going to be held. And they allowed us to just keep our vehicles there. So we get there, we're 10 o'clock at night, we load up all of our stuff, and we head down the road, a mile or so away is the foot of these mountains, and logging roads that go up into these mountains. So we have this caravan of ATVs and a Polaris Ranger, and I'm in the lead because I'm the only one that knows where we want to camp. So it's, I don't know, I'm just going to guess 3 to 5 miles. It was a very slow trek, a slow journey, because we had to go through several creeks, wet creeks, rutted trails, some of them very steep, up one side of a mountain, down another, through creeks, and then down over. So we eventually get to this place where I wanted to camp, and it was awesome. I mean, so let's just say it's 11 o'clock when we finally get there. We've got all our ATVs all set up, and there was a gentleman there named Roy. He's about 60, in his 60s. He said, "Oh, crap." He said, "I lost one of my walkie-talkies." He put his hand in his pocket, he pulled out one of his walkie-talkies, and in the other pocket was empty. And he was mad. He said, he said, "Man, these are 30-mile, whatever, Motorollas, 30-mile or 60-mile Motorollas," and he paid a bunch of money for them, like $90, and he was pretty mad. And we were like, "Well, I don't know what to say to you, Roy. We just came a long ways, and there's no way to even begin to know where you could have lost that thing." So he was kind of, messed up about that. And I immediately, I had my headlamp on. I'm looking over at Dave, who's another older gentleman sitting on his ATV, and I noticed on his foot tag, not foot tag, but the floorboard, the newer ATVs have floorboards on the sides. Under his foot was a piece of paper. And I said, "Dave," I said, "you're losing stuff too." And I just kind of said it as a joke, and I reached down, and he lifted up his foot, and I pulled out this piece of paper, and it was actually a photograph. And I looked at it, and I was like, "What?" I said, because I couldn't really identify it. It was just a dark photograph. And he took it from me, and he said, "What?" He said, "Oh." And then he stuck his hand in his pocket. He pulled out a lot of about 10 or 12 photographs. He said, "Man," he said, "this code is about 3 years old." He said, "I just pulled it out of my closet." He said, "These are old photographs I took with my grandkids from at a talent show at school." So it's only pictures that a grandparent could love, because they all looked the same, from him sitting way back in the back of an auditorium and these kids up on a stage. So really, you couldn't even tell what these pictures were. And short of not taking them yourself, you wouldn't even know what they were. So that's really the only conversation we had about the photographs. The next morning, Dave and Roy both took the trail all the way back to Christ 40 Acres, following the route that we came in there, just to see if they could spot the walkie-talkie. And since we didn't have a whole lot happen that night, I mean, we did hear a few noises, and may have heard a rock being tossed or something, but we didn't have enough activity to make us want to stay there a second night. We went ahead and moved to another campsite, and we eventually joined back up with Roy and Dave. They came back up, and they could not find the walkie-talkie. And I knew they wouldn't. I mean, it was too fast. The distance was too great to even know where to look. Anyways, so we moved to a completely different area for the second road, and we camped there. And we spent a night or two there. And then the third night, we moved way back to my original camp spot that I'd spent years working. That's my main campsite that I was telling you about, where, we used to put out our baits and stuff. So for the next night or two, we're at that campsite. Now, throughout this whole time, I had a new experiment that I was trying to implement, and I had purchased like 15 little solar-powered flowers that would collect solar sunlight during the day, and then they would glow all night long, just these little flowers. It was kind of a neat idea. So I found a spot on the mountain that I could walk up off of a logging road up until there was this clearing, and I set up some chimes, some wind chimes that had glowing, lights, that LED lights that would fluctuate, different colored, blue, red, green, and they were solar powered also. So I had all of these LED light things in this little clearing up on top of this mountain, but I had 2 or 3 game cams in the woods watching these flowers, because I just thought, if the flowers, the lights are not bright, maybe these animals will think they're interesting and will come up and at least look at them. So, but what I did was I kept bringing people back up there, especially at night, because it looked so cool to see these glowing flowers up on, stuck all over this little open field area on top of the mountain. I kept bringing people up there, and because we'd look at them, because we thought it was neat. On a Thursday night, 4 days after, we first arrived there, it was on Thursday, and Tom Powell shows up. It's the first time I ever met Tom Powell, because he was going to speak at the conference. And I think Mike Hall was there. Mike Hall's wife, Dulcie. They're from the Texla group down in Texas. We were at camp, and it was dark on Thursday night. And I was like, "You guys want to go see those flowers?" I said, "Man, you got to see these flowers, man. They are so cool." And so we loaded up Tom Powell, somebody else. I think his name was Marvin, and then Mike Hall. That's 3 other people, and there may have been somebody else, but it was just us. And so we leave the campsite, getting down the logging road, going down through a wet creek and up another way, and all of a sudden, as I'm going up the mountain, I can see in the distance, I see this little pile of rocks sitting right in the middle of the trail as I'm heading up the hill. And I was just on that trail just a couple hours earlier. And so I told the guys, I was like, "Wait a second." I said, that was not there earlier. And so we went up to it, and it was 3 stacks of rocks high, and there was a white plastic bag, just a small white plastic bag, being held down by the top rock. And apparently it was an Alco bag. And Alco is just a discount store that's there in Palahena, which is 15 miles from there. So it's an old ratty plastic Alco bag on the top being held down by a rock. So I get out, and it headed back to my Polaris, and I walk over to it. And at that point, I'm just thinking, somebody's jacking with us. And we were just laughing. I was like, "Man," I said, "if somebody thinks this is funny," I said, that is a pitiful excuse, for a rock climber. So we just laughed, and I said, well, maybe, I think Mike Hall said, well, maybe Bigfoot thinks you should clean up some trash. And so we just kind of made it as a joke. Yeah. I took the top rock off, I tossed it over to the side. You gotta admit, at this time, it was just too, it was just too surreal to be real at that point. It was just too hokey. So I take the bag and I look at it, and I look into the bag, and I see at the bottom, it just looks like there was a receipt at the bottom. So I just closed it up, and I was like, all right. So I made a big display. I waved the bag over my hand in case there was a Bigfoot watching. I was like, all right, I understand. We're trashy, and people throw away too much trash. I said, I'll pick up the trash, and I made a big deal out of it, waving it around, and I walked back to the Polaris Ranger, and I shoved that little baggie under the seat. And I walked back, and I just kicked the rocks off of the road so that I could drive on. And we just laughed about it. We just figured, somebody's jacking with us, and thought it was funny. So we go on up to the top of that mountain, go up and see the flowers that I had set up. Everybody thought it was cool and neat and all that. And then we come back down. And when we came back down, I said, you guys want to go on down the mountain this way and then come in around at the base of the mountain to the campsite, or you guys want to go back the way we came? And they're like, well, let's just go on this other way. It's pretty significant because that I asked that, because whoever said, let's just go on, the way we haven't been yet, because that's where we found the second rock cairn. But anyways, so we start heading down the mountain the other way, and we're circling around, and as I come around this bend, there, right in the middle of the road, is another rock cairn. And at this point, I just figured somebody's going along the road. Somebody must have showed up early for the conference, and they've been up on this road, and they're just stacking rocks up and think they're being funny, or maybe they were doing it to attract a Bigfoot. I didn't know at this point. So this time, to me, it just looked like a stack of three piles of rocks. My call got out to just kind of kick it off to the side. But what he did was he started disassembling it from the top down. He took the top one off, and then there was a second rock that he took off, and once he took it off, there was a little piece of wood, a little old piece of wood. The base had three rocks with the cavity in the middle, and it had a little piece of wood sitting over the top of that cavity. Now, you got to know that it had rained for a couple of days since that Monday. So, for some reason, the bag was protecting something, and now this little cairn is set up in a way that it's keeping the rain off of something. Well, anyways, so Mike removed that piece of wood, which revealed the cavity between the three stones at the bottom. And he goes, wow, he said, look at this. And I saw him reach his hand down in there. At that point, I still didn't know what he was doing. And then he pulls out a walkie-talkie. And I said, oh, no. And I was the only one in the Polaris Ranger that knew that we had lost a walkie-talkie going in 4 days earlier. Everyone else there was like, what are you getting all excited about? They didn't know what was going on. I said, oh, my God, you are not going to believe this. I said, no way, no way. The hair on the back of my neck started raising up. I said, you guys, we lost a walkie-talkie on Monday night coming in here. And they all looked at me, and I was like, we got to go back to camp and see if that's Roy's walkie-talkie. And they're like, yeah, you're right, we do. So he hopped in, had the walkie-talkie, and I flew back to camp. And when I got to camp, I said, Roy, before I tell you what happened, I said, here, look at this. I said, where's your other walkie-talkie? I said, is this your walkie-talkie? And he got his other one, and he put them side by side and looked at it. And he said, yep, that's my walkie-talkie. He said, where'd you get it? And then I told him, I said, you are not good. I said, no way. And of course, everybody was super excited about it, and we all went back up there and looked at it and couldn't believe it. This rock cairn, no way. So the next morning, we did some crazy things that night. We ended up taping open several walkie-talkies and then driving up on roads and pretending to lose them. And we'd leave them taped open, and then we'd run back to camp and monitor those channels to see if something was picking them up. But nothing happened with that experiment. But the next morning, it was still the talk of the town, the walkie-talkie incident. So it was the first day of the conference, and we're talking about it. We're telling people about it. You're not going to believe what happened yesterday, and, the thing was missing 4 days. And it never even crossed my mind to look in that bag from the first rock cairn until I was talking to somebody, and I said, that first rock cairn might have been something significant. And I went out to my Polaris Ranger, and I dug under the seat. I found that Alco bag, opened it up, and that piece of paper at the bottom of the Alco bag that I thought was a receipt, I flipped it over, and it was a photograph. It was one of them dark little photographs that you couldn't tell what it was. It was just an auditorium picture. And I found Dave, and I said, Dave, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. And I showed him the picture, and he said, yep. He said, that's one of my photographs. I said, that's what was in that first rock cairn. And these rock cairns were a quarter mile apart from each other on different walking roads.
That's amazing. You hear things like that. For some reason, it doesn't shock me when you hear things like that. So those things must have been watching you guys, followed you guys in the whole time, and you guys probably were completely unaware that they were following you in.
Believe me, we talked about this so many different ways, not even a snowball's chance in hell that we lost those two items in the same spot. There's just no way. There's no way on a 5-mile slow trek through the woods that you would lose two items at exactly the same spot. So that tells me they followed us from the beginning all the way till we got to our campsite.
You found a picture in one area like it was protected, and then you found your walkie-talkie in another area and it was protected.
Right.
It makes you wonder, I mean, they must have followed you guys all the way up when you guys were looking at the solar flowers and then cut ahead of you guys. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. Cut ahead of you guys and then drop the walkie-talkie off on the other side of the trail, on this completely separate trail.
I don't think they did it ahead of me. It's just that where those two items were found was on the exact trail that we took. Even though these trails intersect with each other, and if I was to go along one trail and then I hit an intersection, sometimes I could either go straight or I could turn, depending on which different areas of the mountain I wanted to go to. But both of these cairns were found on our original route to our first campsite.
I gotcha.
So they were put in different spots. Maybe that's where we lost each item. I don't know. Maybe they put them there because I kept going back up to the top of that mountain to show everybody there's glow-in-the-dark flowers. So it could be multiple reasons. I don't know. But coincidentally, it was on the original route to our first campsite. So I can't know which is the significant factor that put them cairns in that particular spot.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. I want to get to, there's a lot of questions in here, and I have some of my own questions. But I want to, if you would, we jump to the encounter of the one in the campsite. I know you've told it a million times. I know you're sick of it. Would you mind telling that encounter? And then what I'd like to do is get to some of these questions, and then I have some of my own questions about the topic that get your take on.
Okay. My friend who I had been researching with in the Kaimichi Mountains, his specific research area was the Chickasaw National Park, just south of Sulphur, Oklahoma. And we had a lot of discussions about his area, even before I got there, because we were researching together and we were friends, when I met him there in the Kaimichi area. So I knew a lot about the park because he'd filled me in on all of his research there. And there was actually other researchers there that were researching the park. There was a gentleman named Dr. Charles Hallmark. If you can look up his name, I mean, he was always trying to get fingerprints by his baiting techniques there. He was baiting trash cans in the winter months in the closed-off portions of the park. So I actually got online and I read some reports, from that area. And one report that stuck out in my head was somebody went to an adjacent town to see a movie one night while they were there camping. And on their way back, maybe it was around midnight or so, after seeing a movie one evening, they come back into their campsite and something ran from their campsite and the headlights of their vehicle. So when I read that, that's how I formulated the plan of what I wanted to do when I went there. I thought, well, if that night one of these creatures came in and was examining somebody's campsite while they were gone, then I just need to make them think that I'm gone from my campsite. And that was really the basis of my plan. So, after my friend Keith and I were in the Kaimichi Mountains at the time, and I took him home and dropped him off. He actually lived in Paul's Valley, which is 15 miles north of Sulphur. So I dropped him off at home and then went to the Chickasaw National Park. And he told me what campsite to go to. He and his wife was going to join me the following evening, and I was just going to spend the first night there by myself. So when I get there, I'm thinking it's 5:36, 6 o'clock, something like that. It wasn't dark yet, but it might have been getting close. So I first pull in, and the first thing I notice is the place is empty. I mean, there's like 130 campsites in this particular stretch of a campground, and it's all along Rock Creek, just north of Veterans Lake. And I noticed right off the bat that there's nobody there, not even a camp host. And it's the off season. So I pull, it's a one-way street or a one-way lane, worming its way through all these campsites along Rock Creek. And so I'm working my way along Rock Creek till I get to campsite 30. And you can only pull in and park one way because it's a one-way. So I'm parked alongside this campsite 30 with the rear of my truck pointed towards Rock Creek. And I get out and I set up my campsite. I set up my tent, set up a table full of food, and I put out some melons and some other bakes on the table. And I get in my truck and I go into town to get me something to eat. And, I get me some fast food somewhere. And when I come back to camp, I'm thinking it's about 7:30, which is even closer to being dark. So it's starting to get dark. Because it was February, it's like February 3rd or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it gets dark pretty early. So I'm back, it's like 7:30. And I stop at the front part of the park. Since I already know I'm the only one there, I don't have to worry about anybody else being there. So I go ahead and at the very front of the park, I take blankets up to the inside windows of my truck. And my plan was, up to this point, I had done a lot of research in the Comanches, and I'd done a lot of time in my truck, and the way I did do my camping, and I just, with parabolic, and when I listen to these things move, I know they're stealthy, and I can only imagine what they do when they're creeping through the woods, coming up on your campsite, and I'm just assuming that whatever they're doing is they're just paying lots of attention, and they're looking for any signs of anything that they need to be worried about. But that's just their nature. So I thought, well, if I had one standing 100 yards into the woods looking at my campsite, I can't have him be able to see through the windows of my truck. I have a crew cab diesel truck, so I can't have something being able to look through the truck and see me moving inside. So that was my reason for hanging blankets up on the insides of the truck. I just wanted them to not be able to see in through my windows. But I had the blankets set up to where I could park the blankets right over my steering wheel, and of course at the corners where I could just pull the drapes back, if you will, and then just look into the mirror on the side of my truck or look out the side window. So I drive into my campsite. I set a parabolic microphone on the top of my truck, and I've got a recorder. This was kind of at the beginnings of my research, so I really didn't have good equipment. I did have a good parabolic, but my recorder was a crappy, it wasn't digital, it was where you actually had these little bitty micro cassette tapes, like 15-minute tapes.
Yep, I remember those.
The crappiest, cheapest recorder you could have, but I didn't know any better. I mean, I'm just enjoying my own research at that point. I really wasn't trying to do anything that would convince anybody else that these things are out there. So anyways, so I pulled into my campsite. I've already got my parabolic set up with the cord running down through the driver's side door so I could just put the headset on. I never even opened up my door. Matter of fact, I keep a big pea jar in my truck whenever I'm doing this so that I never even have to open up the door and go to the bathroom. It's very important to me that once I commit to not making a noise or not being seen or heard, I mean, that's what I got to do. So peeing in a jug is one of the things you got to do so you never reveal that you're there. Anyway, so I'm sitting there. I got my seat, kicked back. Now, the truck is full of supplies. The back of my truck has all my camping supplies in it, Tupperware containers, a generator, propane, little green propane tanks are all in the back of my truck. The cab of my truck had ice chests and food products and things like that. So really, all I like to do, and the two front seats are bucket seats. So I'm pretty much locked into my driver's seat with other stuff in the seat. I mean, so I just had my seat leaning back with my headset on, and I'm listening. And I'm sitting there in the dark, and I eat my food. And by the time I'm done with my food and I'm sitting there for a while, it must be 10 o'clock or so. And anybody who uses a parabolic knows that there's just a beautiful cadence nighttime of woodsy sounds that it can really lull you to sleep when you're listening to the woods. I mean, whatever sounds you hear, the wind blowing, the creeks with the water flowing, and whatever insects, and even though I wasn't hearing any insects at all, it's just February, I didn't have to worry about any insect sound. And that was also what's great about doing wintertime research, for me too, is not having to weed through all those types of sounds. But still, I mean, I'm listening, and I got my little recorder there, and I think it's, like 10 o'clock. At some point, it's somewhere around 10 o'clock, 10:30, something like that. And I hear my first noise that completely breaks free from the noise that I had been listening to ever since I settled in at that spot. And that is crisp, clear footsteps of something walking through dead leaves. Just crunch, crunch, crunch. I mean, and you know what that sounds like if you've heard those things. So I'm sitting there with my headset on, and I got to turn up really loud. I mean, with that parabolic, I know you can hear a gnat fart 300 yards. So I was really hearing things crisp and clean. So I hear something walking, and it's just crunching through the leaves, just as clear as day. And I'm really perking myself up and paying attention, because this is the first time something's happened. I've been there for a couple, 2 or 3 hours, and so I was really excited. So I'm listening, and it didn't take long for me to hear as it's moving. All I can really do is try to put a picture in my mind of what I'm hearing, because I don't see anything, and I'm not matter of fact, I'm not even looking, because I know that it's at some distance away from my truck at that point, so I'm not even worried about peeking out of the curtains at this point. So I'm just listening to it, and I'm hearing this thing walking around. And remember, this is a big park, 130 campsites, and the trash cans that they had at the time were just the regular metal trash cans with the round lids on the top. And that's something you can just buy at the hardware store. And then sometimes they had the cables connecting the lid to the can so that those lids wouldn't get lost or whatever. But I was hearing whatever this thing was going through the park, and occasionally I would hear one of those trash can lids pop off, and then it put back on. Now, I've been to that park 100 times since then, so many different times, and there's been times that I've heard those trash can lids get knocked off by raccoons, and I would hear them hit the ground. Sometimes they would roll, sometimes they would just hit the ground, but I would never hear them being put back on. Now, a lot of the trash cans had cinder blocks that was weighting the lids down. So some of them did, some of them didn't. But and I know the difference between hearing a raccoon knock a lid off that does not get put back on, and then hearing the lids being put back on, in conjunction with the footsteps that I was hearing also. Now, also, it didn't take long before I was hearing, to me, a pretty distinct sound, which was a stick being dragged through gravel. Now, each one of these campsites has gravel pathways that connect each campsite, and gravel pathways that walk to the restrooms. There's at least 2 or 3 restrooms in this park. The doors just push open into these restrooms, and so they're in close proximity to wherever you're camping. So I'm hearing whatever's walking through the park it clearly has a stick, because it's dragging it through the gravel when it crosses gravel. But then when it goes back into leaves, I hear his footsteps crunching through the leaves, and I don't hear the stick being dragged through gravel anymore. So I pretty much have a clear picture in my head of what's happening, even though I haven't seen it yet. And then at some point, I can't tell you how deep into hearing him moving through the park, at some point I hear my first where the stick hits metal. Bing! And I can only, even though I didn't see it, I can only imagine that it's the metal lantern posts that are in each campsite. And the reason I say that is because I hear the next post be hit in about 15 or 20 seconds. Bing! And walking, dragging sticks, walking in the leaves, more dragging sticks, and then another ting, at about 15 or 20 seconds, which puts the cadence of this thing tapping the post as he's walking by him at each campsite. So the cadence is very important as to putting the picture together of what I'm seeing in my head. This thing is meandering through the park, looking in trash cans, dragging a stick, tapping metal posts. And so, and what's interesting is, before this night is over with, I eventually see two creatures, a very large male and a small one. The small one appears to be about my height. I'm going to say 5.5 foot, maybe 5 foot, 5.5 foot, something like that. But that is small compared to the big one. But I've got to clear it up now. After a couple of years of talking about this and talking to people about behaviors and things that we know, I really think now that the one that I was hearing initially going through the park was the little one. I really think that it's a young male, and it was going through the park. Maybe it knew that it's the off season, and it really didn't expect to have anybody in there camping. So I think he was just kind of meandering through the park without a care in the world. Didn't care how much noise he was making. I mean, it's really surreal for me to know, especially all the research that I've done before and since, and not had something like this happen again. So I know I caught him at a time when he really just didn't expect anybody to be there. His behavior reflected that. Anyways, at some point, I hear this creature stop. For the first time, after all of that movement through the park, going from trash can to trash can, I hear him stop. And I'm paying attention. I hear this thing, after a few seconds of silence, I hear it take a couple of steps and then stop again. And then another 5, 6, silence, and then 2 more steps and it stops. And to me, I'm thinking I've got a pretty clear, accurate picture of what I'm seeing at this point. And so this movement tells me he sees me and that he's moving from tree to tree and approaching my campsite. At least in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, okay, he sees me. He is coming up on my campsite right now. That's what I'm hearing. And that was when I started looking out my curtains and blankets, trying to see if I could see any movement. And I was just parting the blankets. I wasn't opening them up, making a lot of movement. I was just cracking it so that I could peek out. I mean, I was trying hard to just, remain motionless. I didn't want my truck jiggling. I didn't want nothing to know that I was in my truck. I'm just trying to see if I could see any movement. And I'm listening to him. And, throughout this whole period, I'm flipping micro cassette because that stupid recorder would not shut off when it reached the end of a cassette. It would just stay on. And so I get to where I'm flipping cassette thinking, I don't know if it's ended or not, and I didn't want to turn on any lights, so I'm just flipping cassettes. And anyways, that ended up jacking me up with what I thought I recorded that night. But anyways, so I'm doing all of this at the same time, and I'm peeking out my windows, and I'm looking in my side mirror, because I'm thinking, I don't know why I thought the rear of my truck would be where it would come in, but that is where he came in. I don't know why I thought that would be where he would come in. Who knows why? But I do know that my parabolic was sitting on my truck, pointing towards the rear of my truck. Even though I did not have a dish on it, it was just laying without a dish. That way I could hear 360 degrees around me. But it would still pick up significantly more where it was pointed at. So it was pointing towards the rear of my truck, which is pointing right at Rock Creek. I'm going to assume it was about, 125 feet from the edge of Rock Creek. And Rock Creek is about the width of a 2-lane road, and it varies in depth from anywhere from a foot deep to 2 or 3 foot deep. That's the Rock Bottom Creek. And it was right behind my truck. Now there was a road going between my campsite and some other campsites with trees that were on sides of the road. And I think it was on this road, and it actually dropped down 2 or 3 feet. And where I saw, when I first saw the shadow of, I'm assuming it was the young one. I'm looking in my side mirror, and I saw some shadowy movement in that little stretch of woods behind my truck. And so I'm kind of zeroed in on that point, looking in my side mirror and just watching that point, because that's where I saw movement. Sure enough, there's a tree there that I saw him place his hands on the left side of that tree, and it was like he pulled himself around to look into my campsite, and he kept his hands on the tree as he looked into the campsite and then ducked back behind the tree. And that's the first moment I actually saw him, and it looked like it could be human. It looked like he had upper body, round head. It just looked like a human looking around the tree and ducking back in behind the tree. That's when I was really starting to get excited at that point. I knew where he was. He was right behind my truck, maybe 30, 40 feet, in the wood line behind my truck. And then a tree. It could have been the tree that he was hiding behind. But this is the first and only time I heard a wood knock. And it was loud. Pow! Hit the tree. And immediately, it wasn't just a second after that tree got hit, I heard something sloshing across Rock Creek. Slosh, 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 slosh. And the banks of that creek are, 10 foot. It's 10 foot vertical, not vertical, but 10 foot steep banks, And so whatever crossed this creek, come up the side of that bank and joined him. And I didn't see it join him. I just know that at some point, two would eventually come out of the woods. So I know he was joined by a second one. When I see, it wasn't very long after this that I heard my first vocals. Now, what's interesting is, a while later, I actually had a conversation with Charles Hallmark, discussing with him about what had happened that night with me. And that's when he filled me in that he had been baiting the Bigfoots in that park in the off season in those trash cans back there. He hadn't done it for 2 years. 2 years ago was the last time he had baited them, and he was getting fingerprints on some of his cups and stuff that he was baiting inside those trash cans. I thought that was significant because it showed me that they were still going through the park looking into those trash cans, probably for the baits that he had been setting up a couple years before. But anyways, he also told me something that I did not tell him. And the thing is, the vocalization that I heard, I don't know which one did it. I'm sure it was probably the big one. But it started hooting like an owl. It went, ooh, had a little bit of a warble at the end. And I recorded it. And I've got those recordings. You can actually, if you listen to, I think the YouTube link that somebody posted on your Sasquatch Chronicles page, to where I'm telling the story to somebody else, they've got the recordings that I made that night of them hooting. Dr. Hallmark told me, before I even told him about the vocalizations that they were doing, he said there's at least 4 different groups of Bigfoot's clans that come through that park. He said one of them, there's one clan over by Guy Sandy Creek. He said they've got different calls. He said each group has their own specific calls. And he said the ones over at Guy Sandy do whoops, like whoop. He said but the ones at the park, Rock Creek Park, he said they hoot like owls. And when he said that, I was, it just verified to me that he's already been researching there for years, and so those are things that he found out eventually, and that's what happened to me that night. It was hooting like an owl like you wouldn't believe. It was loud, it was crisp, and it was right behind my truck, and he did it about every 5 or 6 seconds for 3 minutes. There was like 17 of these hoots with the warbles at the end. And I've taken these recordings, and Steve Coles, took them, put them on spectrograms and tried to listen to them. And, it showed that they got louder and louder each time. I told him, I said, it sounded like he was moving while he was hooting because it kept getting louder and louder till the last one was really loud. I don't think the thing was moving, but I think it was getting louder and louder each time. I think that may have been his way of testing the campsite to see if he could cause anything inside the tent to stir. That may have been their pattern of how they would, try to figure out if a campsite is empty or not. You do that long enough just outside of camp, and you might make somebody move in the tent, and then they can know that somebody's there, and then they can move on. Well, I didn't move, and there was nobody in my tent. So when he did that 17 times, I think that's the moment he convinced himself that the campsite was empty. And that's when they broke free from the tree line. And I'm watching the spot because it's the exact same spot where the young one hit the tree, where he stepped out from around the tree and I saw him. So that's the spot I'm watching it, and that's where they came out of the woods at. This big one, he was stooped over, and his arms were swinging. The little one was to his right, just to the rear, right at his flank. And they were kind of jostling for position, bumping into each other, running, kind of quickly getting to the back corner of my truck. He immediately, I'm thinking that he was bent over. His hands looked like they were only about a foot and a half from the ground as they were swinging. He could have very easily went into 4x4 mode and took off if he needed to. I feel like he kind of had himself positioned that if he needed to, that he was already ready, close to the ground, ready to go. But when he got to the back corner of my truck, that's when the little one, that's when he stood up straight. And up to that point, I didn't have a really good size estimate. I just saw that they were two, a big one and a little one. But when he got to the back corner of my truck, and he was next to my truck, and I saw his full height, he stood up straight, had his left hand on the post on the back of my ladder racks. I saw him put his hand on it and squeeze the bar, and then I saw his right hand on the crossbar up to the upper top corner of the back, which cross beam that crosses the rack. And he stepped around the truck. Now you got to understand, there were multiple things that I was having to take in that was happening. I was trying to pay attention, but I was also pretty afraid. I was pretty terrified at that point because to me, it looked like he was about to come down the driver's side of the door, or the driver's side of the truck. And that may have been the most panicked that I was at through this whole process, because my doors weren't locked, and I'm looking out my window, and I'm thinking, he's going to come down and smash his face up against my window to look in my truck. And just a really quick thought of that happening really, it terrified me quite a bit.
I bet.
And my heart, I had the adrenaline pumping at that point. I actually let my blankets close, and he was right there by my truck. I let my blankets close. I didn't close them forcefully. I just kind of let them fall closed because I needed it to look natural. I did not want him to know I was in my truck. And I rolled off to my side, and I remember kind of almost, kind of scrunching up in a sitting fetal, because I was thinking, oh my God, this thing is massive. He could kill me. And I remember my heart was beating so loud and hard that it sounded like I just ran, 100-yard sprint. And my chest was, it was pumping. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'm having to think all of this within just a matter of seconds. I'm thinking, oh my God, he's touching my truck. And I am thumping. My chest is thumping. And I thought that he could probably feel my heartbeat through touching the metal of my truck. And that worried me. So I pulled my back off the seat of my truck and was just sitting with just my butt touching the seat because I just didn't want him to know I was in my truck. I was convinced that he did not know I was in my truck. He put himself in a position that immediately placed the truck between any telepathy. He didn't have any paranormal abilities. He didn't mind speak with me, and he didn't know I was there. And I would think that if he had any of those abilities, he should have known I was there. So the tent was that was his point of where somebody had to have been. And with all of his experience with campsites, he would be correct. That it would be a tent. And they probably have plenty of warning when somebody's in a sleeping bag, when they try to get out of a sleeping bag and they put on some pants and you hear zippers and you hear, whatever going on. They probably have plenty of time to get out of Dodge, if somebody's in a tent that's, about to come out of the tent. So anyway, but I had a table full of food between my truck and the tent, and they never stepped out to that table full of food. But what they did do, the little one moved in behind my tailgate. And this happened right at the same time that the big one that I thought was coming down the side, the little one moved in behind my tailgate, and then I let the blankets close and rolled off to the side, and all of that happened. And I'm thinking he's coming down the side. But it wasn't just a second later that the whole ass end of my truck squatted. I mean, it squatted down to where, it felt like the bed hit the tires. That kind of weight. This thing was on the back bumper of my truck. And my truck was brand new. So it was stiff. It's a 3/4 ton diesel. It was very stiff. And and when it sunk as much as it sunk, I went into my second panic mode because I'm thinking, oh my God, he's in the bed of my truck. I'm thinking this thing is in the bed of my truck, and I still don't want him to know I'm there. My plan was to have them go to the front of my truck, and I was just going to hit my headlights and film them through my windshield. So as hard as it was, I was still trying to maintain my plan, which was not to reveal my presence, but I'm still panicking because I'm like, this thing's in the back of my truck. Now, I'm not looking. All I'm doing is feeling what's happening to my truck. So I'm thinking he's in the bed of my truck. And I remember reaching and grabbing the key, which was in the ignition, and thinking to myself, and I was on the verge of thinking, I'm going to need to start my truck up, because if he thinks that he's going to climb on the top of my truck, there's no way it's going to be able to handle it. It is going to crush in. And so I was trying to pay attention. If it sounded like to me that he was going to get on top of my cab, I was going to start my truck up and take off with him in the back of my truck. And I'm trying to come up with all of these different scenarios within just a matter of seconds as things are unfolding as what they're happening. But fortunately for me, at the moment I'm touching the ignition thinking that may be an option I'm going to have to do, I hear him rummaging around items in the back of my truck. As crazy as this sounds, I had a moment of relief, because at that, I went from thinking he's about to climb on the top of my truck and what am I going to do? I'm going to have to take off, to at least I knew what he was doing. And as long as I could hear him back there, rummaging through the back of my truck, at least I knew where he was and what he was doing. So I had just a slight bit of relief at that moment while I'm listening. He's just knocking stuff around. I've got big Tupperware containers, full of sleeping bags and, whatever camping supplies I had was all in the back of my truck. And he's just knocking stuff around. I had a generator back there, and I found out the next day that he turned completely over. So I can imagine something the size of this thing probably just flipped it. I can imagine him just flicking it and turning it over with his fingers. But needless to say, I know it wasn't a raccoon that turns a generator over. And then at some point, I had 2 green propane tanks sitting in the back corner next to the tailgate. And while he's rummaging through and knocking these containers around, they accidentally knock the 2 little green tanks together, and they go, ding. He stops. I hear everything stop. And then I hear, ding, ding, ding. And it's clear that he is knocking those 2 tanks together and enjoying the sound that it's making.
The 2 propane tanks?
Yeah. The 2 propane tanks. And I recorded it too. I had it recorded. And just tapping them together, just ting, ting, ting. It's like he's playing with them. It could have been the little one. It might have been the little one. If the little one was behind the tailgate, the little one could have just reached right over there to where they're at. But in my head, I'm just thinking it's the big one because I just don't know. Well, anyways, and so eventually the noise quiets down and I don't hear anything else. But you got to understand, my plan was I thought at some point, no matter what I had to sit through, at some point they would end up in the front of my truck, either walking away or walking on the road or whatever, and I would be able to just light them up with my headlights and just film them through the windshield. That was my plan. So no matter what happened, I was sticking with my plan. And I wasn't about to reveal that I was in there. And of course, in hindsight, if I knew that they were walking away, would I have risked jumping out with my camera? You know, all of these things. It's still a scary prospect when you have something that size with a young one with it. You can think about doing those kind of things. But still, I thought I had a solid plan. And so, you know, I'm waiting and I'm waiting. I don't know where they're at. I think they're still around. I keep looking out the window towards my front because that's where I wanted them to go end up so I can light them up. But they never went that way, so I can't know where they went after that. I just know that it wasn't long after that I heard metal being hit again. And it sounded to me just like the stick that was hitting the lantern post when in the initial approach, when he was hitting the lantern post. That's what it sounded like to me. I heard the metal being hit again. And so I just assumed that's what it was. Needless to say, I ended up sitting in my truck until daylight. I did have something come back to my camp about an hour and a half after that. By about 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm sitting there still listening, and I hear something coming. I don't know what it is. It sounded like there was a young one throwing a hissy fit. About every 15, 20 seconds, I would hear just this god-awful scream. But it kept getting closer and closer. At some point, something ended up over at my table and was eating the food. And I could not look at it. And this is where you're going to want to shoot me because of what happened the first time, and I missed it, and they never did move to the front of my truck. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to get them this time. This is different. I said, I felt like it was a female and a youngster. I felt like the youngster didn't want to come up there. But the female was bringing the youngster, and every 15 to 20, you know, every 50 feet it would get closer, it would just yell out a scream, and Mom was still dragging it. That's what I was thinking in my head, even though I didn't see anything. But the evidence at the table the next day would suggest that. And I was sitting there listening, and I still thought, even whatever was there eating the food could easily go to the front of my truck and walk away in that direction, and I could film them. And so, you know, unfortunately for me, I was sticking with my plan. But I heard whatever was eating the melon pieces was eating it the exact same way you and I would eat a peach. When you and I take a bite of a peach, we make a sucking sound when you bite just because of the juice. It's so juicy that you'll bite and suck at the same time. Whatever was biting that fruit was biting it the same way. I could hear it sucking as it was biting. So of course I'm excited, thinking, oh, all right. I mean, the first time it was a male and a young male that was here. I'm thinking this is a female and an even smaller one. At least that's what I had in my mind. And eventually they left too. Now, since I've had 2 visitors that night, I thought, well, maybe something will come back. You know, I wasn't ready to give up my position at that point. I still hadn't got what I came for, which was a video, and I just thought, they'll come back. Something will come back, and I'll get them in the front of my truck. And, you know, needless to say, 6 o'clock rolled around, and 7 o'clock rolled around, and the sunlight started coming through the woods. And the moment the woods started getting lit up by morning and sunlight, I jump out, and I'm not scared anymore. It's light out. You know, you're a lot braver when there's sunlight out. And
Right.
I get out, man, and I start looking around, and I look at the back of my truck, and I see scuff marks, dirty scuff marks on my bumper, you know, on each side, which pretty much paints the picture to me that that's where this thing was standing. It brought the dust from the ground to my bumper. And the size of this big one tells me that if he was standing on my bumper in that cross beam, which is 7 foot high from the ground, if he was stepping up on my bumper, the cross beam would then probably be at his pelvic. So I'm thinking he could have easily just leaned over or bent over that back cross beam and rummaged through my equipment. When I thought he was in the bed of my truck, it was clear now that he was only on my bumper. I was looking for hairs. I was looking for fingerprints on my bars. I was looking, where I saw him grab the bars. I mean, I was looking for everything. All I really saw was dusty smears where, he either had dust on his hands, dust on his feet, and there was dusty smears. I was still early enough in my game where I wasn't too into fingerprints or didn't even know how you could get fingerprints or anything like that. I was just excited and just looking around. I went over to the table full of food. Well, no, I looked in the back of my truck. I saw that the generator was turned over and all of these other things we messed around. And I looked and I saw that my 2 green propane tanks were gone. So I realized that the second stretch of metal sounds that I heard as they were leaving wasn't hitting of the lantern post, but of the clanking of those 2 tanks. I could only imagine that little one with them in his hands as they were walking away and him clanking them together. That really, is the only sense that I can make of the fact that they were gone, and I was hearing metal being clanked as they left. So they clearly took those, but I can't be certain that's the sound I was hearing that was being clanked. It just made sense that it was. So I went over to the table full of food, and I'm looking at it, and I can see the melon pieces. What I had bought was a container full of melon chunks. I just had it opened up and just set out on the table. And there were some laying out on the table, and some had bite marks out of them, and clearly looked like half circles, where a human had bitten out of them. And I took pictures of them somewhere. I've got them somewhere where you can see the bite marks out of these melon pieces. Now, what's interesting is there was a little dirty handprints on the side of my table, and an apple had been rolled over to the edge of the table where those fingerprints were, and something had put teeth marks all the way around that apple but never took a bite out of it. It was just teeth marks into the apple all the way around. And so in my mind, all I could think was, let's just say that there's a female Bigfoot there eating those melon pieces. She rolls an apple to the edge of the table, so this little one that's just barely as tall as the table has something to mess with while she's tasting these melon pieces. Because that's what it looked like to me with the handprints and the way that that apple was chewed on but never bitten out of. And then the melon pieces that she obviously tasted had big bite marks out of them. So that's the extent of what happened that night and with the evidence that was presented to me, the morning. The male was clearly neck and head taller than my ladder racks, which measured 7 foot. I measured them. Because since he stood right next to my truck and I saw the size difference, that gave me a size reference. So I measured from the ground to the top of my ladder racks, and they were 7 foot even. So this thing was a full neck and head taller than 7 foot. So I'm going to guess an easy 8.5 foot tall. And his weight, according to how much my truck squatted when he climbed up there, I had 2 fat dudes climb on the back of my truck so I could gauge how far my truck would squat. And man, it hardly dropped at all with 200-300-pound dudes on the back of my truck. It just dropped a couple inches. And I'm telling you, when this thing got up there, it felt like those leaf springs dropped until it hit solid. Like it hit the tires, that kind of drop. And I kid you not, a few years later, I had a leaf spring start to fall out from under my truck. And I went to the dealer, and I had them look at it, and it had gotten cracked, and it was rusted in the crack, which tells me it had been broke for a long time. And it was starting to come out and actually hit the tire, so I had to have it replaced. And I asked them if they'd check the other side, and they checked the other side. He said, yeah, the other side's broke too in the same spot. It's those extra springs that, when the bed gets crushed down too far, it's those ones that take the extra weight.
Right.
Both of those were broke on both sides.
Jesus.
The weight limit on the tongue, on the bumper says a 500-pound tongue weight for any trailers that you use is the limit. So I was always guesstimating the weight of this thing of at least, 600 to 800 pounds. So, I got 2 broken leaf springs, and he completely dropped the bed of my truck on top of the tires when he climbed up there. So he might even have been 1,000 pounds. I don't know. I just know that it was heavy.
It's interesting. The one thing that really fascinates me about the encounter, besides him coming up and taking stuff out of your truck or kind of rummaging through your truck, the little one did a wood knock, and then within a matter of seconds, there's a second one there.
Yeah, and you're right. From all of the movement before, which just tells me a kid strolling through the park without a care in the world, and he didn't really care that he's dragging the stick. That didn't mean anything. Hitting the metal post didn't mean anything. But the moment he hit that tree, that big one joined him. That tells me that these things had predetermined what signal would bring the big one over.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that a lot of the wood knocking has to do with hunting? I mean, and the reason why I ask that is I've heard so many people talk about that. You know, Mike Humphreys talks about that. I had Sydney on the other night, and she had mentioned that too. She would hear wood knocks from one side of her property, and then she'd hear another wood knock from another side of the property. Then shortly after that, she'd hear an animal being killed. And she says that every time she hears the wood knocking, it seems like she can hear an animal being killed.
Well, that only tells me that wood knocking is important for their communication, even among their hunting techniques. But it doesn't change the fact that that doesn't mean that the wood knocks are always used for hunting. It just means that it's always used for communication.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some form of communication.
There was a time that I was researching by Lake Oologah off the Spencer Creek area. I've been researching there for a couple of years, and I had a significant thing happen there twice. It tells me, I don't know if the tapping was used to alert other Bigfoots, or if it was just, I don't know what, but I heard some metal being tapped, and I thought it might have been a fence post or something. I don't know, but it was pretty significant. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't wind. It wasn't, and I told my partner, I said, I got to find out what is making that noise. And this is an area that we had high activity. And I slipped off down into a creek, and I was going to follow this creek towards the sounds. And the moment I slipped down the side of this 10-foot deep creek, it stopped. So that tells me wherever it was watching us. And the moment it couldn't see me anymore was the moment it stopped. So I don't know if that tells, maybe he was telling another group that was foraging or sleeping or whatever that, I'm going to go ahead and tap this while I'm watching these guys, but the moment I stop, and that means you guys need to be paying attention. I mean, who knows? We can only speculate. I can just only tell you what happened.
Yeah, no, and it's a little bit more than even speculating. You can put together a picture, and that's why I love so much about your encounter and the research that you've done, because you can kind of put together a picture of what's going on with different behaviors. We've talked about it in the past with the different types. It seems like up here in the Pacific Northwest, they're larger. They have a different look to them. It's more of the Patterson look. And it's kind of like what you and I were talking about in the beginning with regard to that one gentleman I'm going to have on the show who shot one. He said, hey, man, it didn't look anything like the Patterson film, not even close. He goes, it was the ugliest thing I ever saw. It kind of looked like a chimpanzee. So I think there's different types depending on the location that you're in.
Well, the big one that I saw when it came out, about 4 years after my encounter, I went to see a therapist, a psychologist, and I paid her to put me under hypnosis and took me back to that night so I could try to come up with some more details of what I saw that night. And I recorded the session. And I wasn't super stoked about, the results from the session, but it allowed me to go back to that night and kind of relive it a little bit, and try to look a little deeper into my memory and see if I could come up with any, better descriptions. And unfortunately, the moon was behind the creature. I mean, I could see these huge coconut shoulders, and the hair was actually, I could see the moonlight coming through the hair, so the hair was actually flayed open, as it flared across the shoulders. Huge neck, head coming down to the shoulder, and then the round shoulder going down into the arm. But one of the other things that stood out to me was the V-shaped latissimus dorsi that ran up under his arm. Because as you can imagine, something standing there with its left arm holding the side post of my back corner of my rack. And the way I was looking at him, that means his latch was, reaching the bottom of his arm, was crossing the front of his body. He was reaching, and grabbing a hold of that post. So I had a really good look at just the musculature. He was lean and extremely robust. When he come out of the woods, he was stooped over, completely ape-like. I mean, just the motions was completely ape-like, the way the arms were swinging in his stooped over, gait. But the moment he got to the corner of the truck and stood up straight, I mean, a straight backbone, like the best, straight backbone person that you could ever see standing at attention. I mean, he was very straight, but he was looking over the racks towards the tent. I mean, so he was specifically elevating himself up to make sure to look over the racks at the tent. So I don't know if that was a natural straight backbone stance for him, or if he was just exaggerating his stance to be able to peer over the ladder racks, towards the tent. But still, I mean, he had a straight backbone, very muscular, and I don't know if it was the time of the year, since it was February. I don't, and down south, we don't really have the winter months, even though it was cool. It's not cold, in the winter. So I don't know if that makes a difference on, what maybe in the middle of winter you might see a heavier, Sasquatch, has maybe a thicker layer of fat, in the northern areas. I don't know. I just know that this one was in February. He was lean, so maybe they stay a little leaner, because there's not much of a winter down here.
Yeah, and I think you answered Ron N's question. He wanted to know if you were anticipating the Sasquatch coming to the truck, and that really wasn't the plan. The plan was for it to come through the campsite and then eventually go to the front of the truck to where you could videotape them. You weren't really anticipating them coming.
Right.
Yeah. Pete S. wants to know, through all your research, do you have any quality videos or pictures? If so, can we see them?
Well, I sent you a couple of pictures from that park, and they're not the greatest, but you can clearly see that big red male looked like a gorilla, in the picture that I sent you, with his big old football shoulder pads and his cone head, and you could see that his face was even lighter colored than the red hair of his body. Even in that pixelated picture, from the still taken from a video, you can clearly see, you and I know that that's what that was, but, you're not going to convince the public that it's not anything more than a blob squatch.
A lot of people are asking about the Falcon Project, and I know it's been all over social media. I think people are under the impression I was going to tear apart the Falcon Project, and that really couldn't be further from the truth. For people out there who don't know what the Falcon Project is, it was a airship that they were going to put in the air. William Barnes, along with Dr. Meldrum from Idaho State, they were going to put together this airship to track these animals and also send a ground team in. And I got to tell you, Randy, I've been getting so many messages about the Falcon Project. A lot of people have been emailing me and asking me what happened to the Falcon Project. And to be honest with you, I have no clue what happened with the Falcon Project. And so without bashing the Falcon Project, can you kind of give us a rundown on what happened with it?
When I initially heard about the Falcon Project, I got excited about it. I mean, who wouldn't be ready to jump on board something that has the potential to really open this research up? And so, when I heard all the stories of the technology and the equipment that, was going to be utilized in this project, I wanted to be on board. So I called William, and, we talked for about an hour or two, and I just told him, I said, the biggest problem that you're going to have with getting volunteers is getting somebody that can walk away from their life for 6 months and still have things be able to function at home and have their bills paid and all these things. I said, I can do that. I said, I've been doing research since 2003. I said, I own my own company. I've got enough money in the bank where I can leave I can leave for 6 months and my wife can take care of things here at home. And I said, I can pay my own way there. I can get myself there. I can buy my own equipment. I said, so that's how I sold myself to him to let me do this. And needless to say, he dangled a few carrots out there, which, ended up not coming true, as far as equipment and paying for our food and, even paying us, for our effort at some point, if you get the funding. That was a big carrot that he dangled out to us. I think I was probably the most supplied person that showed up there. I certainly traveled the furthest, and I drove myself there, and I probably spent $3,000 on equipment, hiking equipment, solar panels, and all kinds of things that you would need in the backwoods. And, I bought everything that I could possibly need and use to be ready for this, and I got myself there. So that was quite the expense also. You're talking 1,800 miles. So I get there, and so do the other people. And, and I'm really not wanting to poo-poo on other people, but this really was a lesson in the management of people as well as the project. And I'm telling you, I don't think he did a very good job of weeding, the people out for this project because, there were people that showed up that, didn't have phones, didn't have vehicles, didn't have equipment, didn't have, and sure, they had the carrots dangled out to what they thought, they were going to get out of this project as well as myself. But the moment that they realized that they were woefully underfunded personally, then you become a burden on the other people there that has to pick up the slack. And so the tensions got bad. There was one guy that talked too much, and another guy threatened to kick his teeth down his throat, and I had to keep people from leaving. There's 2 people wanted to leave after about a week because they just weren't convinced that we were going to get the equipment. I talked them into staying for another week till we gave some ultimatums and some deadlines, to William, and it never did come through. And eventually I'm there by myself, and I stay 4 or 5 days at the very, very end by myself because he's still telling me, well, there's somebody else I can talk to, and, they might be able to come through with some funding. And so I really hung on to the last moment to where I got down to where I had like $200 in my pocket. And at that point I said, what? I got just enough cash to get me home, so I can't stay a day longer. And that was my story.
Yeah.
But I do know I was dealing with Meldrum. Meldrum and I, we shared some emails, and we both worked on an article about the Falcon Project. So I know Meldrum's a part of it. But unfortunately, William is not a very good manager, business manager or manager of people. That is the big stumbling block for this whole project. William just couldn't come through, and it still could. There are meetings that's slated to take place sometime in June between Meldrum and some other benefactors who might be willing to contribute. So who knows? I know that this thing can still happen. All it's going to take is one person who's willing to step forward and say, you know what, I believe in this, and I'm going to fund this, and it could happen. But what happened, the reason it crumbled so fast is there was somebody in charge of collecting the money at Idaho State University, and he was supposed to be funneling whatever funds came in and put it into a specific account that was going to be used by us. Well, this guy ended up quitting, and come to find out, he didn't funnel the money correctly. So William and Meldrum both thought we had $6,000, and that's really what we were going to get started with. They were going to rent 5 thermal cameras and pay for our food. So we were pretty much just going to get us started with the $6,000. And then if we could come up with something that would, get people excited and more funding would come in, they thought that's how they could keep it sustained. But when you find out that we're already up there on the ground waiting for equipment and we're not even being paid, nobody's paying for our food or nothing at that point, and people are already, some guys are already broke, and then you find out that you had $0 where you thought you had 6,000, that's where it immediately started to crumble. I mean, guys left angry, and there were guys who actually started the Falcon Project support page on Facebook. Those were the guys on the ground that even set that page up. So, when they left angry, and I'm not blaming anybody for leaving angry. They just did what human nature would dictate, and that is they left angry, they thought that they were scammed, and so they would take a parting shot at the project by pulling the websites off and pulling the Facebook off, which they had set up. So that just, it's kind of like a parting shot as they left, and so it just really started to look like it was crumbling. And I still think there's hope for it. I think it's sound principles. It's just going to take some money, and you never know if the money comes through. Maybe they'll give me a call and say, they appreciate me hanging on as long as I did, and maybe if they'll pay me, maybe this time around, I'll jump on board and try to take care of the guys on the ground and run it if they would let me. But that remains to be seen.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you talked about it. I mean, I get so many emails about it, and I have no clue what happened out there. In my heart, I don't think it was a scam. I know all the people on Facebook, all the wolves in the Bigfoot community are first to jump on it and say it was a scam and it was a hoax, and
right.
I don't think it was. I mean, William spent years and years and years and years of planning this. It just sounds like bad project management heading out there. But, you learn from your mistakes, and, hopefully it's a good idea, and hopefully he'll jump back to it and learn from this mistake. But, I understand why guys left mad. I mean, I probably would feel the same way. Randy, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's been a blast talking with you. I know you and I talked the other day for a few hours, and that was a blast. And I know you and I almost look like we could be brothers. I think you're in a little bit better shape than I am, but I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you being on the show tonight. So thank you for being here.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. I mean, I always enjoy talking about it, especially, with like-minded folks.
Everyone out there, if you get a chance, check out SasquatchChronicles.com. I've been doing a midweek show. I try and do it on Thursday nights. And one of the shows I'm going to have coming up this Thursday night, I got a call the other day from this guy. Probably one of the most credible people I've spoken to. And it was interesting because when him and I spoke, he started telling me this story about how he had shot one of these creatures back when he's retired now, but back when he was younger, he ran into one of these things and he didn't know what it was. It was out there in southeast Oklahoma, and he said that it kind of reminded him of a chimpanzee, a huge chimpanzee, with some human-like features. He was charged by it. The thing started throwing rocks. He was charged by it. He actually ended up shooting it in the head. He had so many details, facial details. This was in the middle of the day. And when he shot it, it had actually come up over his truck, and he was within a few feet from it when he shot it. Very, very interesting encounter story. I was sitting on the phone with him and just listening to him tell his encounter, and there was this long pause when I was on the phone with him. And then I thought, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be asking you questions. I mean, I got so wrapped up in him telling the story. It was just such a fascinating story. So look for that on Thursday. Until then, everyone, appreciate you listening tonight. Hope you had a great weekend, and I will see you guys next time.